My name is Olivia Carter, and for years I've poured my heart and soul into building Events by Olivia, my boutique event planning company here in Denver. We've orchestrated some of the city's most talked about galas, fairy tale weddings, and high-profile corporate launches. Success, by most measures, was mine. But the polished surface of my life hit a fault line, a crack that was about to rupture. I just discovered the real reason why my life was suddenly systematically falling apart, and it involved someone I never would have suspected of such calculated cruelty, my own mother-in-law. The truth, when it finally unspooled, was a venomous tapestry woven from grief, resentment, and secrets I couldn't have imagined. There are layers to this story, multiple truths that will be revealed, each one more shocking than the last. For a long time, I felt like a marionette, my strings pulled by invisible hands, my carefully constructed world threatening to collapse. I thought I knew loss when my husband Ethan died. I thought I understood grief. But this was a betrayal that burrowed into the marrow of my bones, a cold, deliberate attempt to erase me. I remember sitting in my office staring at the third cancellation notice that week, a knot of ice forming in my stomach, and thinking, this can't be a coincidence. That was the moment the ground began to tremble. If you've ever felt systematically undermined by someone you once trusted, or even tried to love someone whose approval you perhaps unknowingly craved, then you need to hear this. Comment below and hit that subscribe button, because this journey is one of profound discovery and ultimately of unexpected turns. Trust me, if you've ever battled for your dreams against all odds, if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own story, this will change how you see family loyalty and even the nature of revenge forever. To understand the storm that broke you, need to understand the calm that came before it, or at least what I perceived as calm. I grew up in a middle-class family, a stark contrast to the old-money elegance of the Caldwells. My childhood was happy, filled with the bustling energy of a home where creativity was encouraged. From as early as I can remember, I was the one organizing neighborhood carnivals, planning elaborate birthday parties for my friends on a shoestring budget, of course, and sketching out dream weddings in my notebooks. There was a magic in bringing people together and crafting moments that would become cherished memories. This passion wasn't a whim, it was woven into the fabric of who I was. My parents, bless their hearts, always supported my little projects, never quite imagining it would become my career. I launched Events by Olivia with a small loan and a boundless supply of ambition. The early years were a grind. Late nights, endless networking, learning the hard lessons of entrepreneurship. But slowly, meticulously, I built a reputation for innovative designs, flawless execution, and a personal touch that clients adored. Then I met Ethan Caldwell. He was charming, intelligent, with a kind smile that reached his warm hazel eyes. He was a successful architect, grounded despite his family's prominent name. Our courtship was something out of a storybook, a whirlwind of laughter, shared dreams, and a deep, undeniable connection. He saw my drive not as a threat, but as something to admire. He championed events. By Olivia, often brainstorming ideas with me late into the night. Marrying him felt like the most natural, joyous step in the world. I loved him deeply and completely. And then there was Susan Caldwell, Ethan's mother. My first impression of Susan was one of formidable, almost intimidating elegance. She was always impeccably dressed. Her silver hair perfectly coiffed her home. The sprawling Tudor-style Caldwell mansion on the outskirts of Denver, a testament to generations of wealth and status. The air around her seemed to shimmer with an unspoken authority. Our initial interactions were polite, if a little cool. I attributed her reserve to a natural caution towards the woman who had captured her beloved son's heart. I was determined to win her over, to show her I was worthy not just of Ethan, but of being part of the Caldwell legacy. Oh, how naive I was. Susan's disapproval wasn't a sudden storm, it was a slow creeping frost. She never outright forbade the marriage, but her reservations were palpable, communicated through 1,000 subtle slights and backhanded compliments. She believed I later pieced together that I was a social climber, that I had married Ethan for the Caldwell name and money despite my own growing success. The irony, of course, was that Ethan and I built our life largely on our own earnings. His father, a man I barely knew, as he was often absent or engrossed in his study, had apparently been a far less astute businessman than his reputation suggested, a fact that would become devastatingly important later. The examples of Susan's subtle and sometimes not so subtle dismissals are seared into my memory. Early in our engagement, Ethan proudly told his mother about a complex charity event I'd just successfully managed for a prominent local nonprofit. Susan smiled thinly. "How lovely, dear," she'd said, turning to her bridge partners who were visiting. "Olivia has such interesting little hobbies. It's good for young women to keep busy, isn't it?" The implication was clear. My career was a trifle a quaint pastime. At a formal Caldwell family dinner shortly after Ethan and I were married, a distant cousin asked about my upbringing. Before I could answer, Susan interjected smoothly, "Olivia comes from a very modest background, so different from ours, but Ethan does so love a project." The laughter was polite, but the sting was sharp. I saw Ethan shift uncomfortably, but he, ever the peacekeeper, merely squeezed my hand under the table. One Christmas, the caterer Susan had insisted on hiring for the annual Caldwell Christmas Eve Gala, a society highlight, had a complete meltdown. The canapés were ruined. The staff was in disarray. Quietly using my own contacts and quick thinking, I managed to salvage the evening, arranging for replacement food from a trusted chef friend and reorganizing the serving staff. The evening was a triumph. Later, I overheard Susan telling a prominent guest, "Yes, thank goodness I had the foresight to have a backup plan. One simply must with these modern caterers." Not a word of thanks, not a flicker of acknowledgement for my efforts. Susan had a habit of mentioning Ethan's previous girlfriend's women from families she deemed suitable. "Victoria Albright, you know her father is on the board of the museum," she'd muse at opportune moments. "Such a lovely girl. They shared so many and common interests." The unspoken addendum, "unlike you." When Ethan and I were looking for our first home, I had specific ideas about location for my business needs and entertaining. Susan would constantly steer the conversation towards properties near her or ones that fit her idea of what a Caldwell home should be, completely ignoring my input as if my thoughts on the matter were irrelevant. Ethan, bless his heart, tried to mediate. "Mother Olivia knows what she's looking for," he'd say gently. But Susan had a way of making her preferences seem like undeniable truths. He loved me, I never doubted that, but he was conditioned to defer to his mother to avoid conflict with her at all costs. He often seemed to believe that if he just gave it time, Susan would come around. He didn't see the steel beneath her velvet glove in the same way I experienced it. Ethan's father, Arthur Caldwell, was a more shadowy figure in the family dynamic. A man of few words, often lost in his study or away on business trips, his presence was more an ancestral portrait than an active participant. I learned much later that his financial acumen was largely a myth, propped up by the family name and years of leveraged assets. This too would play a crucial part in the unfolding drama. My talent, my drive, my genuine love for her son. None of it seemed to penetrate Susan's carefully constructed narrative of me as an unsuitable interloper. She saw what she wanted to see, and for years I tried to patiently chip away at that image, hoping that one day she would see the real me, the woman her son loved, the woman who was building something real and valuable. I was playing a long game or so, I thought. But Susan, it turned out, was playing an entirely different game, one with far more ruthless rules. The foundation of our relationship, or what I hoped would become one, was built on the shifting sands of her disapproval, and the tide was, unbeknownst to me, beginning to turn. The years following my marriage to Ethan, and tragically the years after his sudden passing from an unexpected cardiac event, were marked by a persistent, insidious pattern of Susan's disapproval. It wasn't always overt aggression. Often it was the deafening silence of dismissed achievements, the subtle redirection of credit, the constant low hum of being found wanting. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Before Ethan died, I threw myself into my work and events. By Olivia began to flourish. I thought perhaps foolishly that my professional success would earn me a measure of respect in Susan's eyes. It seemed to have the opposite effect. One milestone moment stands out vividly. I had been asked to plan the mayor's annual charity ball, a huge coup for my growing company. It was a massive undertaking, months of meticulous planning. Ethan was so proud. Susan, when she heard, merely arched an eyebrow. The mayor's ball, oh, I remember when dear Esmeralda Vance used to plan that. Such a society affair. The implication, of course, was that Esmeralda from an old Denver family was the natural choice, and I was some sort of aberration. On the night of the ball, which was a resounding success and garnered significant media attention, Ethan tried to introduce me to some of his mother's influential friends, highlighting my role. Susan, standing nearby, chimed in, "Yes, Olivia does enjoy keeping busy. Ethan is so good to encourage her little ventures." Little ventures. My company, my passion, my livelihood reduced to a little venture. Another time, I landed my first major international client, a luxury brand wanting to launch their new product line in the U.S. with a series of exclusive events starting in Denver. The budget was substantial, the creative freedom immense. It was a game changer for events by Olivia. I was ecstatic. When I shared the news at a Sunday brunch Ethan and I reluctantly attended at the Caldwell mansion, Susan's response was a polite, "That's ambitious, dear. Do be careful you don't overextend yourself. These international types can be so fickle." No congratulations, no curiosity, just a veiled warning, as if she almost hoped I'd fail. Ethan's death shattered my world. The grief was a physical weight, a constant ache. And through that haze of sorrow, Susan's behavior became even more perplexing. One might think a shared loss would bring us closer, but it seemed to deepen the chasm between us. There were no comforting words, no shared tears over memories of Ethan. Instead, there was a chilling formality. I remember trying to talk to her a few months after the funeral, a desperate attempt to connect. "Susan," I began, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I miss him so much. Sometimes I still can't believe—" She cut me off, her voice brittle. "Ethan wouldn't want us to dwell Olivia. We must be strong. I am managing my grief perfectly well. You should focus on, well, finding your own way forward." It was a dismissal, clear and cold. Her grief, it seemed, was hers alone, and mine was an inconvenience, perhaps even an affront. My internal monologue during those days was a whirlwind of pain. Why couldn't she see I loved him? Why did she need to punish me for his absence? Was my grief not valid enough for her? In the years that followed Ethan's death, I poured my energy into the only thing I felt I could control: my business. Events by Olivia became my lifeline, my sanctuary, and it grew. We won industry awards, expanded our team, and became one of the most sought-after event planning companies in the state. I sometimes invited Susan to award ceremonies or significant launch events, clinging to a sliver of hope that she might see my success, acknowledge my resilience. She usually declined with a vague excuse, or if she did attend, her presence felt more like scrutiny than support. At one prestigious industry awards night where I received the Event Planner of the Year award, she attended, seated at my table. When my name was called and I walked to the stage, my heart pounding with a mixture of pride and nerves, I glanced back. She was offering a cursory, polite clap, her expression unreadable, almost bored. Later, she remarked to someone at the table, loud enough for me to hear, well, at least Ethan left her with a way to support herself, however unconventional. The barb, as always, found its mark. My assistant Mia became my rock during this period. She's young, fiercely loyal, and incredibly perceptive. She joined me when Events by Olivia was still relatively small and had witnessed Susan's dismissiveness firsthand at various functions. "That woman," Mia would often mutter, after Susan had swept past me with a cool nod, "has ice in her veins. I don't know how you put up with it, Olivia." My lawyer James Chen, a calm, methodical man who initially handled my business contracts, also became an unwitting observer of the dynamic. I'd occasionally vent my frustrations to him, and he'd listen patiently, offering quiet advice about protecting my business interests, never dreaming how crucial that advice would become. The most recent major disappointment, the one that perhaps set the stage for the coming storm, was when I landed the contract for the Devereaux wedding. The Devereaux were practically Denver royalty, and their daughter's wedding was the event of the year. It was a monumental achievement for my company. I'd sent Susan a personal invitation to the pre-wedding reception I was hosting for the families, a beautiful, intimate affair I'd designed myself. She declined, citing a previous engagement, a garden club tea, I later found out. It was another small cut, but they were adding up, creating a deep well of resentment I tried hard to suppress. I told myself it didn't matter that her approval wasn't necessary for my happiness or success. But a small wounded part of me still yearned for it, for some acknowledgement that I was more than the caricature she'd created in her mind. Little did I know Susan wasn't just withholding approval anymore. She was about to escalate her campaign from passive dismissal to active destruction. And the first tremors were already beginning. The first major tremor hit on a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp, sunny Denver morning that usually filled me with optimism. Mia walked into my office, her brow furrowed, holding a printout. "Olivia, you need to see this. The Hamilton Charity Gala they've canceled, effective immediately." I stared at her. "Canceled? But the contracts are signed, deposits paid. We're 3 months out." "Did they give a reason?" Mia bit her lip. "They were vague. Something about unforeseen circumstances and concerns about our ability to deliver under current pressures." "What current pressures?" A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. The Hamilton Gala was a prestigious, high-revenue event. Losing it was a blow. I spent the morning on the phone with Mrs. Hamilton, a woman I'd built a good rapport with. She was evasive, uncomfortable. "Olivia, dear, it's just, we've heard some things. Whispers about your company's stability. We can't risk the gala." "Whispers? What whispers, Mrs. Hamilton? My company is more stable than ever." She sighed. "I'm not at liberty to say more. It's just a decision we had to make." That was wave 1. 2 days later, wave 2 crashed. The Miller wedding, a lavish affair planned for the summer, a booking we'd celebrated securing. Young Emily Miller called me herself, her voice trembling. "Olivia, I'm so sorry. My fiancé's mother, she's heard some unsettling rumors about you. She's insisting we find another planner." "Rumors, Emily? What kind of rumors?" I pressed my voice sharper than I intended. "I don't know exactly," she wailed. "Something about you being distracted, unreliable. It's awful, but she's adamant." My blood ran cold. Distracted, unreliable. My entire brand was built on meticulous attention to detail and unwavering reliability. This wasn't just bad luck. This was targeted. Wave 3 hit the following Monday. A major corporate client for whom we'd planned 3 successful product launches pulled the plug on their upcoming national conference. The email was brief, citing feedback from influential community members that had led them to reevaluate their vendor partnerships. They wished me all the best in resolving my current difficulties. My current difficulties. What in God's name was going on? 3 major contracts evaporate in less than a week. This wasn't just a downturn. This was a coordinated attack. My carefully built reputation was being systematically dismantled. Mia and I went into crisis mode. We pulled all-nighters, calling every client, every contact. The pattern was chillingly similar. Vague concerns, hushed rumors, mentions of someone influential, expressing doubts. My name, once a byword for excellence, was now being whispered about in connection with instability and unreliability. The source I was beginning to suspect had to be someone with wide social reach and a deep-seated motive, someone like Susan Caldwell. The thought made me physically ill. Could she truly be capable of such vindictive, calculated destruction? The emotional breaking point was near. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. My business, my sanctuary, the thing I had poured my life into after Ethan's death was bleeding out, and the injustice of it burned like acid. This wasn't just about money. It was about my name, my integrity, the memory of Ethan, who had championed my dream. During this turmoil, I found myself thinking about Susan, trying to understand what could possibly motivate such venom. Ethan had once, in a rare moment of candor, spoken about his mother's own upbringing. She hadn't come from old money as many assumed. Her family had acquired wealth later in her youth, and she'd spent her adult life fiercely, almost desperately, cultivating an image of unimpeachable social standing. She was terrified of losing that status of any hint of scandal or imperfection. Her control over the Caldwell image was paramount. Perhaps my modest origins, my independent success, even my grief for Ethan, which she couldn't control or define, all threatened that carefully constructed facade. And now, with Ethan gone, perhaps I was the one loose end she felt compelled to snip, to erase from the Caldwell narrative. Her grief, I realized, wasn't just sorrow. It was a complex brew of fear, anger, and a desperate need to reassert control in a world that had taken her son. Then came the discovery, a piece of information that landed like a dropped bomb, completely unrelated, or so it seemed at first. Through a commercial real estate contact, I heard a whisper, a very quiet, very discreet whisper, that the Caldwell estate, that bastion of old Denver society, was in serious financial trouble. Apparently, Arthur Caldwell, Ethan's late father, had mortgaged it to the hilt years ago to cover a series of disastrous investments. With his passing and then Ethan's, the debt had ballooned unnoticed or ignored by Susan, who likely managed the household, but not the deep finances. The bank was moving towards a quiet foreclosure auction. The news hit me with the force of a physical blow. Susan's fortress, her symbol of status and power, was built on a foundation of sand. And in that moment, something shifted within me. The despair, the fear, the crushing weight of the sabotage. It didn't disappear, but it was joined by a new cold clarity. A flicker of an idea, audacious and terrifying, sparked in my mind. I called James Chen, my lawyer. "James," I said, my voice calmer than I felt, "we need to talk. Not just about the sabotage, about something much bigger." We met the next day. I laid out everything, the canceled contracts, the whispers, my suspicions about Susan. Then I told him about the impending foreclosure on the Caldwell mansion. He listened intently, his expression unreadable. "Tortious interference, what Susan appears to be doing, is a serious claim, Olivia," he said finally. "But proving direct causation can be difficult. As for the mansion, that's a separate, very interesting development." "I want to stop her, James," I said, my voice low and fierce. "She's trying to destroy everything I've built, everything Ethan believed in for me." "What's your endgame, Olivia?" he asked, his gaze steady. My internal transformation was solidifying. The hurt, vulnerable Olivia was still there, but a new, steelier version was emerging. "I don't just want to stop her," I said slowly, the audacious idea taking full shape. "I want to make sure she can never do this to me or anyone else again, and I think I know how." Mia, who had been quietly taking notes, looked at me, her eyes wide. "What are you thinking, Olivia?" I took a deep breath. "I'm thinking of buying the Caldwell mansion." James raised an eyebrow. "As leverage, as the ultimate leverage," I confirmed. "She wants to take away my security. I'll take hers. She wants to make me homeless, professionally speaking. Let's see how she likes facing the same prospect, literally." The air in James's office crackled with the audacity of it. The hunted was about to become the hunter. A few weeks later, after discreet inquiries and complex financial maneuvering facilitated by James, the papers were signed. Through a shell corporation, Olivia Carter, the unsuitable daughter-in-law from a modest background, became the anonymous owner of the Caldwell estate. Susan Caldwell had absolutely no idea. She continued her campaign of whispers, oblivious that the very ground beneath her perfectly polished feet, the symbol of her entire identity, was about to shift permanently. And I, her grieving, supposedly struggling daughter-in-law, was the earthquake. Little did she know I had been documenting everything, and the truth would soon come to light in the most unexpected way. For 3 months, I sat on my earth-shattering secret. 3 months of playing a delicate, dangerous game. On the surface, I was the beleaguered businesswoman fighting to salvage her reputation, projecting an image of resilience while battling a hidden enemy. Beneath, I was the silent owner of Susan Caldwell's world, meticulously gathering every shred of evidence of her malicious crusade. It was an exercise in supreme self-control. During this time, Susan, emboldened by her perceived successes in damaging my business, made one more significant move. She attempted to get events by Olivia blacklisted from the Colorado Event Professionals Alliance CEPE, a prestigious vendor association whose membership was crucial for credibility and referrals. She fed her poisonous narrative to key board members, old friends of hers, painting me as financially unstable and ethically compromised. Mia got wind of it through a sympathetic contact within SEPA just in time. This final audacious act of sabotage solidified my resolve. Any lingering doubts I had about the path I was on vanished. She was relentless. She would not stop until I was utterly ruined. Owning the mansion even secretly changed my perspective in profound ways. The initial thrill of such a monumental power shift gave way to a strange sort of calm. It was no longer just about anger or revenge. I started to see Susan not as a monstrous villain, but as a deeply flawed, insecure woman, terrified of losing her grip on a world she felt was slipping away. Her grand home, the stage for her entire social existence, was built on a lie she probably didn't even fully comprehend until the foreclosure wolves were at the door, a door she didn't yet know I held the key to. Her attacks on me were in a twisted way a desperate flailing, a projection of her own fear and impending loss of control. It didn't excuse her actions, not by a long shot, but it added a layer of tragic irony to the whole situation. James Chen was my steadfast counsel throughout this period. He confirmed we had an ironclad case for tortious interference. "Olivia, the evidence is compelling," he'd said, reviewing the file Mia and I had painstakingly assembled, copies of emails from former clients detailing Susan's slanderous remarks, affidavits from 2 brave ex-clients who agreed to testify about the pressure they'd received from Susan, even a timeline correlating Susan's social engagements with the timing of my contract cancellations. Coupled with your ownership of the estate, this is a checkmate situation if played correctly. He also meticulously guided me through the legalities of the eviction process, ensuring every I was dotted, every T crossed. My emotional state was a tempest. There was a fierce, righteous anger, yes, but also a profound sadness. Sadness for Ethan, who would have been devastated by this war between the 2 women he loved. Sadness for the relationship Susan and I might have had if not for her pride and prejudice. This wasn't a jubilant march to victory. It was a grim, necessary reclamation of my life and my future. My internal monologue was a constant companion. This isn't just about events by Olivia, it's about respect. It's about dignity. For years, she underestimated me, dismissed me, tried to diminish me. She thought I was weak, a social climber easily swatted away. She has no idea of the strength she herself has forged in me through her relentless antagonism. The irony is almost too rich. The house she used as her fortress, her symbol of superiority, is now my most powerful weapon. But it's a weapon I wield not for destruction, but for justice. And perhaps, just perhaps, for a truth she desperately needs to confront. The decision to act to finally bring everything into the open was made on a cold November afternoon. I just reviewed the latest profit and loss statement for events by Olivia. We were still hurting but stabilizing, thanks to my relentless damage control and the loyalty of some clients who'd seen through the smears. But I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for Susan's next strike. It was time. The planning phase was intense. James Chen prepared the official eviction notice for the Caldwell estate and a formidable cease and desist letter detailing the tortious interference, complete with a summary of the evidence and the potential for a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. This was my ace in the hole. James had a brother, Richard Chen, a respected, if notoriously tenacious investigative reporter for a major Denver publication. I met with Richard, laid out the entire story. The grieving widow, the hostile mother-in-law, the business sabotage, the secret mansion purchased, the impending financial ruin of a prominent family. His eyes lit up. It was a reporter's dream. He agreed to hold the story, but to be ready to publish if Susan refused to cooperate. The threat of public exposure, the utter demolition of her social standing, would be a powerful motivator for Susan. Mia, my incredible assistant, compiled a meticulously organized dossier, copies of the deed to the mansion, the financial documents proving its precarious state, before my purchase. The evidence of Susan's slander campaign, client affidavits, everything. It was a damning narrative in black and white. The date was set, a Thursday afternoon. I chose it specifically because I knew Susan often hosted her inner circle, her garden club committee, for tea on Thursdays. A small, intimate audience for her downfall would be far more effective than a private confrontation. I felt a tremor of anxiety, a knot of dread in my stomach, but beneath it a surge of adrenaline, a cold, hard resolve. I was not the same woman who had naively hoped for Susan Caldwell's approval years ago. I was a survivor, a businesswoman, and now a silent power player. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that was left was for the curtain to rise on Susan Caldwell's reckoning, and I, Olivia Carter, was about to direct the scene. Thursday arrived cloaked in a gray Denver sky, the air holding a wintry chill that mirrored the ice in my veins. I dressed with meticulous care, a charcoal gray power suit, sharp lines, a blood-red silk blouse. Armor. Mia gave me a tight hug as I left my downtown office. "Knock 'em dead, boss," she whispered, her eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and concern. James Chen, looking every bit the formidable legal counsel in his dark suit, met me outside. The process server, a discreet man named Mr. Henderson, waited in a separate car, ready to follow us to the Caldwell mansion. As predicted, when we pulled into the long, sweeping driveway of the Tudor-style estate, my estate, I could see several expensive cars parked near the entrance. Susan was indeed hosting her intimates. Perfect. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird, but my face was a mask of calm composure. This was it. Years of slights of being underestimated, of quiet suffering, were about to culminate. We were admitted by the long-serving housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, whose eyes widened slightly in surprise at seeing me, especially with James Chen in tow. She showed us into the grand drawing room where Susan Caldwell was holding court with 4 of her closest friends, pillars of Denver society, all coiffed and bejeweled, sipping tea from delicate china cups. The scent of Earl Grey and expensive perfume hung in the air. Susan looked up, her expression shifting from gracious hostess to pure, unadulterated shock, quickly masked by a veneer of icy displeasure. "Olivia," she said, her voice dripping condescension. "What an unexpected intrusion. And you've brought your lawyer. How terribly dramatic. To what do we owe this performance?" Her friends exchanged curious, slightly alarmed glances. I met her gaze, my own unwavering. "Susan. Ladies, I apologize for the interruption, but I have an urgent matter to discuss with Susan. It won't take long." My voice was even devoid of the tremor I felt inside. Susan waved a dismissive hand. "Well, whatever it is, it can surely wait. We're rather busy." "I'm afraid it can't," I stated calmly. James stepped forward slightly. "Mrs. Caldwell." James began, his tone professional and firm. "My name is James Chen, and I am Olivia Carter's legal counsel. We are here to serve you with a legal notice." Mr. Henderson, the process server, stepped forward from the doorway where he'd been waiting and handed Susan a thick envelope. "Susan Caldwell, you've been served." Susan stared at the envelope as if it were a viper. Her friends gasped, their teacups rattling in their saucers. "Served? Served with what?" "This is outrageous." She sputtered, her composure beginning to crack. "It's an eviction notice, Susan," I said, my voice cutting through her bluster. "You have 30 days to vacate these premises." The color drained from Susan's face. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, flew to mine. "Vacate my home? Are you insane? You have no right. This is preposterous." One of her friends, a woman named Beatrice Ainsworth, murmured, "Eviction. Susan dear, what is the meaning of this?" This was my moment, revelation number 1. Actually, Susan. I said, my voice clear and carrying in the suddenly silent room. It's my home. I purchased the Caldwell estate at the foreclosure auction 3 months ago. Here's a copy of the deed. I placed a notarized copy on the antique coffee table in front of her. The collective gasp from her friends was audible. Susan stared at the document, her hand trembling as she reached for it. She looked from the paper to my face, her expression a maelstrom of confusion, fury, and dawning horror. Foreclosure? You bought my home. You're lying. This is a trick. It's no trick, Susan, James affirmed quietly. The property was heavily leveraged by your late husband. The bank was foreclosing. My client made a legal purchase. Her friends were now staring at Susan, then at me, their faces studies in shock and avid curiosity. The social humiliation was already beginning, but I wasn't finished. Revelation number 2. And while we're discussing uncomfortable truths, Susan, I continued my gaze unwavering. Let's talk about my business events by Olivia, or rather, what's left of it thanks to your systematic and malicious campaign to destroy it. Susan, still reeling from the news about the house, looked utterly bewildered. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, I countered. I nodded to James, who opened his briefcase and produced the meticulously prepared dossier. For the past 6 months, you have engaged in what is legally known as tortious interference with business relations. You have contacted my clients, spread malicious lies and defamatory rumors about my company's stability and my professional competence, directly causing the cancellation of multiple high-value contracts. We have affidavits, emails, a clear pattern of your interference. It has cost my company hundreds of thousands of dollars, not to mention the damage to my reputation. James laid out copies of a few key affidavits on the table. Susan's friends, unable to resist, leaned forward, their eyes scanning the damning words. I saw Beatrice Ainsworth's eyes widen as she recognized the name of a mutual acquaintance who had canceled a major event with me. Susan was pale now, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her friends were pointedly avoiding her gaze, whispering amongst themselves. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. The queen bee was being dethroned publicly. Then the final blow, revelation number 3. And this, Susan, I said, my voice softening slightly, though no less firm, is where it gets truly interesting for everyone. Before coming here, I had a very productive meeting with Richard Chen. Perhaps you know him. He's an investigative reporter with the Denver Chronicle. At the mention of Richard Chen's name, a man known for his exposés on the city's elite, a fresh wave of panic washed over Susan's face. Her friends looked positively aghast. He's very interested in a story about a prominent Denver socialite, her family's hidden financial ruin, the secret foreclosure of her ancestral home, and her subsequent illegal campaign to destroy her grieving daughter-in-law's livelihood out of, shall we say, personal animosity. It's quite the fall from grace narrative, wouldn't you agree? Terribly damaging for one's social standing, certainly not good for the garden club's image or any of the charitable boards you sit on. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Susan Caldwell, the doyenne of Denver society, was utterly cornered, exposed, and on the brink of total ruin. Her friends looked like they wanted the antique carpet to swallow them whole. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I laid out my terms, my voice calm and devoid of triumph, merely stating facts. 1. You will personally call every single client and contact you, spread your lies to. You will retract every falsehood. You will tell them you were mistaken, suffering from profound grief, misinformed. I don't care what excuse you use, but you will undo the damage. 2. You will sign this legally binding cease and desist agreement, promising never to interfere with my business, my reputation, or my personal life in any way, shape, or form ever again. 3. If and only if you do these things to my satisfaction and my business begins to recover as a direct result, I will instruct Richard Chen that the story is for now on hold. And I will allow you to remain in this house. A flicker of disbelief, then desperate hope crossed Susan's face. "As my tenant, Susan," I clarified, "you will occupy your accustomed rooms. You will pay a nominal symbolic rent, but you will do so knowing that I am the owner of this property, and you reside here at my discretion contingent on your good behavior." Susan stared at me. Her carefully constructed world shattered around her. The fight had completely drained out of her. Tears welled in her eyes. Tears of humiliation, rage, despair. Her friends were statues witnessing a complete evisceration. One of them, a mousy woman named Clara, actually dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Finally, Susan's shoulders slumped. In a voice barely above a whisper, choked with unshed tears, she said, "All right, I will do it. I agree to your terms." I nodded, a wave of exhaustion washing over me, but also a profound sense of justice. "Good. You have 24 hours to begin making those calls. James will be in touch with you and your lawyer to finalize the tenancy agreement and the cease and desist. Ladies," I said with a polite nod to Susan's stunned friends, "thank you for your time." James and I turned and walked out of the drawing room, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation and the deafening silence of a socialite's world imploding. Justice wasn't just served, it was a 5-course meal with public humiliation as the main course. As we stepped out into the chilly Denver air, I took a deep breath. It wasn't the sweet taste of revenge I felt, but the grim, hard-won satisfaction of survival and the dawning of a new, uncertain chapter. The 24 hours following that cataclysmic confrontation were surreal. Susan, true to her word, began the humiliating process of making those calls. James Chen arranged for a conference call facility where he and I could discreetly monitor some of the key conversations, ensuring her retractions were genuine and comprehensive. Listening to Susan Caldwell, the proud, imperious woman who had tormented me for years, eat humble pie to former clients and contacts was a strange experience. Her voice was strained thick with barely concealed mortification, but she did it. She spun tales of terrible misunderstandings, grief-induced confusion, and misinformation from unreliable sources. Some clients were audibly skeptical, others surprisingly sympathetic, but the message was clear: Olivia Carter was not the villain Susan had painted her to be. My business events by Olivia didn't miraculously recover overnight, but the tide began to turn. A few crucial contracts were reinstated almost immediately. Mrs. Hamilton of the Hamilton Charity Gala called me personally. "Olivia, my dear," she said, her voice warm with apology, "Susan just called. Good heavens, what a bizarre explanation. Regardless, I am so dreadfully sorry. We were fools to listen to such nonsense. Is it too late to reinstate our agreement? We'd be honored to have you." That call was like the first ray of sunshine after a long storm. Susan herself was a ghost in the vast mansion. She confined herself to her suite of rooms, avoiding me entirely. The tenancy agreement drafted by James was strict but fair. It stipulated her responsibilities, outlined the boundaries of her occupancy, and set a nominal rent which I earmarked for the mansion's upkeep. The power dynamic had been utterly inverted. She was now living under my roof by my grace. The news of the confrontation and Susan's subsequent climb down rippled through Denver's elite circles like a shockwave. Her friends who had witnessed the scene were, I'm sure, dining out on the story for weeks, albeit in hushed tones. Susan's carefully curated image was irrevocably tarnished. Some, no doubt, reveled in her downfall. Schadenfreude is a powerful force in those rarefied circles. Others, perhaps those who had also felt the sting of Susan's condescension, might have felt a sense of vindication on my behalf. One unexpected consequence was a call from Beatrice Ainsworth, one of the women present at the confrontation. "Olivia," she said, her voice surprisingly kind, "I wanted to apologize for being a silent bystander. What Susan did was appalling, and what you did, well, it was rather magnificent. If you're ever looking for a new client for a significant event, my daughter is getting engaged next spring." It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. Support from unexpected allies. Mia was, of course, ecstatic. "You are a total queen, Olivia, a warrior queen. I wish I could have seen her face," she exclaimed, practically bouncing in my office. James Chen, ever the professional, merely offered a rare small smile and said, "A satisfactory outcome, Olivia. Justice in its way has been served." His brother Richard, the reporter, called to express his slight disappointment at losing such a sensational story, but he understood and respected my decision to hold it back, contingent on Susan's cooperation. My own emotional processing was complex. There was relief, certainly, a profound sense of exhaustion. The constant tension I'd lived under for months began to recede. There was also a strange emptiness. I had won. I had protected my livelihood, reclaimed my reputation, and brought Susan Caldwell to heel. But it wasn't a purely joyful victory. At that moment, I felt like my entire identity had been pressure tested, and while it hadn't crumbled, it was definitely reshaped. I thought of Ethan, of the life we'd shared, of the mother he loved, despite her flaws. There was a lingering sadness for the scorched earth that now lay between Susan and me. Was this how it was supposed to feel? I'd won the war, but the battlefield was littered with the wreckage of what might have been. In the short term, life in the Caldwell mansion, my mansion, was awkward. I set up a temporary office for events by Olivia in a disused library on the ground floor, far from Susan's private wing. We coexisted like two wary cats circling each other at a distance. Occasionally, we'd pass in a hallway, a brief, uncomfortable nod exchanged. The grandeur of the house felt oppressive, heavy with unspoken history and recent trauma. Susan was attempting damage control with her remaining social circle, spinning a narrative of personal crisis and reconciliation. But the truth, or at least potent versions of it, was out. Her influence had been significantly curtailed. My boundaries were firmly in place. The immediate storm had passed, but the air was still charged. I knew this wasn't the end of the story, but merely the end of a very painful chapter. A year can change everything. 12 months after that dramatic confrontation in the Caldwell drawing room, the landscape of my life, and indeed Susan's, had undergone a significant transformation. Events by Olivia was not just surviving, it was thriving. The near disaster and my resolute handling of it had paradoxically burnished my reputation. Clients saw me as tenacious, resilient, a problem solver of the highest order. We were landing bigger, more ambitious projects than ever before. The story of Susan's sabotage, though, never publicly aired by Richard Chen, had become a sort of whispered legend in certain circles, painting me as a figure of quiet strength. Susan Caldwell remained in the mansion my tenant. The initial months were filled with a glacial politeness. We rarely spoke beyond strained pleasantries if our paths crossed. She was humbled, diminished in her social sphere, but also I began to sense contemplative. The shock of her public humiliation and the loss of her perceived power had forced an unwelcome introspection. She spent a lot of time in the mansion's vast, neglected gardens, a place Ethan had loved. The turning point, the first real crack in the wall of ice between us, came unexpectedly. The Denver Garden Club, an institution Susan had reigned over for decades, was in a bind. Their annual charity gala, their flagship event, was plannerless. Their usual go-to had retired, and several other prominent planners were suddenly unavailable, perhaps a ripple effect of Susan's tarnished reputation. One crisp autumn afternoon, Susan appeared at the door of my makeshift office in the library. She looked hesitant, smaller somehow. "Olivia?" she began, her voice unusually subdued, her gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "The Garden Club, we find ourselves in a rather difficult position. The annual gala, we don't have a planner." She paused, then met my eyes, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "It's a very important event for us, for the charities we support." Another pause. "I was wondering if you might consider—" I was floored. Susan Caldwell asking me for help after everything. My first instinct was to refuse a sharp, satisfying denial, but then I looked at her, truly looked at her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a vulnerability I'd never seen before. And I thought of Ethan, how much he'd loved this city, how much he'd valued community. The gala supported causes he would have championed. "I might consider it, Susan," I said slowly. on certain conditions: full creative control, no interference, and a clear upfront budget and decision-making process. A look of profound relief washed over her face. "Of course, Olivia. Absolutely. Whatever you need." I threw myself into planning that gala. It wasn't just a job, it was a statement. I wanted to create something spectacular, something that showcased not just my company's talent, but also the potential for beauty and connection. Susan, to my surprise, was true to her word. She stayed out of my way, observing quietly from the sidelines during planning meetings, her expression thoughtful. For the first time, she was witnessing my professionalism, my creativity, my dedication firsthand, unfiltered by her resentment. She saw me negotiate with vendors, soothe anxious committee members, and bring a complex vision to life with grace and precision. The night of the Garden Club Gala was magical. The ballroom shimmered, the flowers were breathtaking, the entertainment was flawless. It was by all accounts the most successful and elegant gala the club had ever hosted. Towards the end of the evening, Susan approached the podium to give her traditional president's remarks. She spoke of the charities, thanked the donors, and then she paused. "And finally," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "I want to extend a very special thank you to our event planner, Olivia Carter." She turned and looked directly at me, a genuine, almost soft expression on her face. "Olivia, your vision and your tireless work have made this evening an unforgettable triumph. This is without a doubt the most splendid gala we have ever had. Thank you." A lump formed in my throat. It was more than just a public compliment. It felt like an acknowledgement, a fragile olive branch. A few weeks later, Susan approached me again, this time with another even more surprising proposal. "Olivia," she said, as we found ourselves in the grand foyer one afternoon, the east wing of the mansion. It hasn't been properly utilized in decades. It has its own entrance, plenty of space. It would make a fine permanent headquarters for events by Olivia. Far more suitable than that cramped library. I was speechless. She continued a touch of her old briskness, returning but softened now. "And I was thinking, perhaps we could institute weekly dinners, just the two of us, to discuss business matters, of course, the running of the estate, and other things, perhaps." I looked at her, at this woman who had been my nemesis, now offering me a professional haven and a tentative bridge towards something new. "I think that could work, Susan," I said, "with one condition." "And what is that?" "No more secrets," I said firmly. "No more hidden agendas, from either of us. Absolute honesty." She met my gaze. A long moment passed. Then she nodded slowly. "Agreed, Olivia. No more secrets." And so began a new chapter. Events by Olivia moved into the beautifully renovated East Wing. The weekly dinners became a fixture. They were often awkward, at first stilted conversations punctuated by long silences. But gradually, painstakingly, we began to talk. We talked about the estate, about my business. And carefully, cautiously, we began to talk about Ethan. Susan shared stories from his childhood. I'd never heard moments of tenderness and vulnerability that painted a fuller picture of the man I had loved and lost. I in turn shared my memories, my grief. In those shared recollections, we found a common ground, a space where our mutual love for Ethan could exist without the shadow of our past animosity. Our relationship transformed from bitter antagonism to a complex, respectful, and surprisingly resilient alliance. We were not and would never be a typical mother and daughter-in-law. There was too much history, too much pain, but there was a growing understanding, a hard-won respect. One evening, after a particularly candid dinner where we'd actually laughed over a shared memory of Ethan's endearing clumsiness, Susan went to the antique safe in the dining room. She returned with a velvet box. Inside, nestled on satin, was an exquisite diamond and sapphire brooch. "This belonged to Ethan's grandmother," Susan said, her voice a little thick. "She adored Ethan, and he would have wanted you to have this." She pinned it to my dress. "I see now, Olivia, I truly do. He chose well. You are a remarkable woman." Tears pricked my eyes. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of acceptance, of healing. In the end, the truth didn't just set me free, it rebuilt me stronger, and it rebuilt something I thought was lost forever. I looked around the grand dining room of the Caldwell mansion, the house I had bought as a weapon, the house that had witnessed so much turmoil, and I realized with a sense of profound clarity that it was no longer a weapon, nor was it just a house. It had become a bridge to a new understanding, a bridge to an unexpected kind of healing, and in the most unforeseen way, a bridge to a new, complicated but genuine form of family. Looking back on that tumultuous journey from the depths of betrayal to this unexpected peace, the lessons are profound and multi-layered. The first is that sometimes the greatest battles are not about destroying an enemy, but about transforming a relationship, however impossible that may seem. My initial goal was to stop Susan to protect myself, and yes, there was a desire for justice, for her to feel a measure of the pain she had inflicted. But what emerged was far more complex and ultimately more rewarding than simple revenge. Another lesson learned deeply etched into my soul is that standing up for yourself, for your truth and your worth, can open doors to healing you never imagined. It was terrifying to confront Susan, to risk everything. But in doing so, I didn't just reclaim my business, I reclaimed my power, and in an odd way, I think it allowed Susan to confront her own demons. Grief can make people cruel. It can twist them into unrecognizable versions of themselves, but sometimes, just sometimes, understanding and firm boundaries can offer a path back. And perhaps most importantly, true strength isn't just about winning. It's about the courage to build something new from the wreckage, to find grace in the ruins. The mansion, once a symbol of everything that divided us, became the very place where we started to rebuild. So I ask you, have you ever had to fight for your place in a family or business when someone was actively trying to push you out? What did you learn from that experience that shaped who you are today? If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the sting of injustice or the struggle for recognition, please like this story, subscribe for more tales of resilience and unexpected turns, and share it with someone who might need to hear that even the most fractured situations can hold a surprising potential for healing. Comment below with your biggest takeaway. I'd love to hear your thoughts. My closing message to you is this: your worth is not determined by those who try to diminish you. It's forged in the fires of your challenges and defined by your courage to rise above them. Never ever let anyone extinguish your unique spark. Let's build a community here where we lift each other up, where we share our stories of overcoming adversity and finding strength we didn't know we possessed. Thank you for walking this path with me. Stay tuned because life is full of crazy twists and turns, and I have more stories to share.